There are always rays of sunshine on Sabres Live, none more pronounced than the appearance of Shayna Goldman on Friday here on the heels of a tough one, Shayna. It's been a challenging week. The group has lost 3 in a row, but we're happy to see you. Always appreciate, and our audience certainly loves all the contributions. Is there, in your opinion, something statistically really pronounced that is very prevalent in the worst way for Buffalo right now that has kept them this distance from the Islanders and Penguins in the playoff race?
Yeah, if we look at their most recent stretch, really like their last 10 games, we look at 5-on-5 play. And 5-on-5 play is like the foundational piece to every contender, right? It takes roster construction and having skill at the top of your lineup. But like at the end of the day, you need to have a good 5-on-5 team, because if you don't, it will burn you in the end. You can get by, you can steal a playoff series with good goaltending or an amazing power play or, a penalty kill that can stop everyone. But at a certain point, your 5-on-5 play is what's going to bite you. And the thing with the Sabres is they were outperforming expectations at 5-on-5, especially offensively a lot of the year. And that's helped them power through. But we see this last stretch of it just completely collapse at 5-on-5. And yes, the win against Tampa Bay was really good. That second period that they had last Saturday, that was like the perfect 5-on-5 period. They nailed it. Everything else, though, you just see them fall apart there. And it shows in the results right now. If you want to contend, that's an area you need. And generally, if you are strong at 5-on-5, the results are going to come on both ends of the ice. It just isn't there. The results aren't there, and then the underlying play isn't either.
So I kind of dug into my Sports Logic account and found that 14 times this year, the Sabres expected goals against was over 4 in a game. They won 7 of them. How? Is 4 goals against expected like a crazy high number? And last night was 5.67. Like, that is really high.
Yeah, that's really high. Like, ideally, you want to keep it below 2, especially like if you look at it like with the Sabres last night, it was so high. And that's why like the goaltending numbers look terrible, right? Like there was so many goals. It was what, 5.9, I think, per involving hockey goals allowed above expected. But then you look at the fact that they allowed that much, and they allowed, someone would be like, how do you allow that many expected goals against? They don't understand it. Is you're just allowing a ton of shots against, and you're allowing a ton of quality chances against. It's not a sustainable way to be. Can you steal a game like that? Absolutely. The best goalies in the world can. And even, goalies that are average can have these like outstanding nights that, they're on display, 50 saves, and they had all these scoring chances against. It can happen, but you can't rely on that. When you see those numbers add up like the Sabres are, that's going to hurt them in the long run.
So they've also been dealing with some injuries along the way, like most teams, but Buffalo had been quite healthy this year. So when Tuch and Dahlin all of a sudden were impacted by this, thankfully Dahlin came back quickly, but we'll deal with his numbers here in a moment. Alex Tuch's absence is at 7 games now. I think a silver lining in this is people genuinely enjoyed Jack Quinn on the top line, and Jordan Greenway got a turn last night and had a multi-point game. How are you viewing Tuch's absence on the Sabres right now and its impact and his replacement value of the players who've stepped in?
So I went through Hockey Viz and I was curious how the Sabres offensive generation looks with Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner on the ice without Tuch, because we know that they've been such a mainstay combination. So it includes times outside of these 7 games, but we know how long the 3 of them have been together, that it really isn't that much from earlier. And they're still really good offensively. They get a ton from the quality areas. They're right in that home plate. They do outscore expectations, but like that's something with Tage Thompson on the ice you always have to anticipate, because he has such a good wrist shot. And, he's one of the best finishers with that shot. So, it kind of comes with the territory, and it just means a player is a really good shooter sometimes. Mm-hmm. But defensively, they allow a lot more back with that combination on without Tuch. He's not the only defensive presence on it, but, it is something that's a little bit glaring for me. When you bring Jack Quinn into the fold, he's had some okay numbers with that combination. I think that it seems like he's better suited elsewhere, a little bit lower in the lineup. It seems like he was really clicking in the middle 6. So, it makes sense why they put him back there. And with Jordan Greenway, you add someone who I think in theory could be the ideal person. Like Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner, if we look through their game score, which I did right before this, against Tampa, against Edmonton, they were both really positive. So they can manage without Tuch. But you look at the last 2 games and it's so rough without him. for Greenway to join that combination, it's interesting because I think his first couple games, he looked a little bit out of place, but then they put him with the best players. And in that way, he doesn't have to be the game breaker on the line, right? He can just be the passenger and follow along with Skinner and Thompson. And there's no better way to catch up to speed and learn this team on the fly than playing that kind of role. What he brings, his strength of his game is his defensive efforts. Because when you look at what he did in Minnesota, he was with Eriksson Ek and Marcus Foligno, and those two are so good because they're incredible on both ends of the ice, and Greenway struggles offensively. So that defense complements the two offensive players. And I think we started to see it at the beginning of last night's game, and then obviously everything fell apart. I'm curious if he can keep that up there, and then they can start shifting him and see where he best fits. I don't think he's the worst option to move forward with there because he brings what they're missing. And then in general, I think it'll just help him, catch up with the team and improve and bring what we expect him to bring, which is, plays off the forecheck and strong defense into the middle six with some, with some size and some skill.
What about Rasmus Dahlin? He was asked last night, are you hurt? And he says, no, we know he missed some time, and everybody's playing with a little something now, but where has the numbers gone for Dahlin, either on the offensive side and on the defensive side of the game? Like, is there a big changes in both end of the ice?
Yeah, so I was curious if he had a high game score any night without points. How much was his effort below the surface and what the team generated with him on the ice and what they didn't allow. And he's had a couple games, game score uses points. So the more points you have, the more it's going to fuel it. But sometimes it's a good way to break down like the empty calorie scoring. Is his point totals outpacing his actual game score? And if it does, it kind of shows you're not doing something right below the surface. He's had some good games without points, and he's had some really low game score games where he's managed points too. This recent stretch, though, the problem is 5-on-5 play, like completely and totally. No, he's not collecting points, and that's going to lower the total of his game score. But I looked on HockeyViz, they have a chart that kind of like shows the player's pace throughout every game of the season. And you see when he came back from injury, it started poorly at 5-on-5, and it's growing in the wrong direction each way. You can see they're generating less in these minutes, and they're not capitalizing on those chances. And you see they're allowing a lot more, and the goaltending isn't supporting the tougher workload that they've had in those minutes. So it's going really poorly right now on both ends since he's returned.
Is there clarity within what you're looking at as it pertains to usage with different partners? Like, is it a Dahlin thing? Is it a pairing thing when he's on the ice? Because obviously Samuelson's been hurt too. He missed a couple of games. He came back in last night, and obviously everybody walked into a bit of a minefield last night.
Yeah, I think the partnerships definitely matters because for Dahlin, he's going up against top competition. And when he has Samuelson, someone who manages those minutes really well and doesn't do anything super spectacular, but he's taken on some of the toughest competition in the league in his short time in the NHL, it definitely hurts to not have that balance because it puts more on Dahlin. And I think too, we see it like sometimes players overcompensate when they're the number one. And now, they know they're part of an imbalanced pair. So that could definitely come into the mix too. I think that there's so much pressure on this team as it is to, while the team didn't buy at the deadline and didn't say, go on, go contend, everybody knows that they're battling for a spot and, it's stacked against them. So I think adding that in, it just hasn't been an easy stretch. I really am curious if we see him start turning it around now that he has Samuelson back. Like, that's the big question. That'll really answer it for us. And as much as we can look at the numbers, it's just, watching it too and seeing how do they look together? Do they look confident? Does it look like they're overcompensating and things like that?
No, I know it was 10-4 last night, and plus minus could be thrown out the window, or you can look at it and say, well, Lyubushkin was a +1 and Riley Stillman was even, right? And a 10-4 loss, -6 at the end of the night when your goals consider the goals. What is Riley Stillman adding, and him and Lyubushkin, what can they do? I thought they may be a good third pair. It's hard to evaluate in a 10-4 loss, but what are they? And I know you've liked Lyubushkin, so does Stillman fit in as a good partner for him?
Yeah, I want to see them get some more time together because it's so hard to go off small samples, especially in a game as chaotic as last night. Like, you can take everything with like a grain of salt, cut that grain of salt in half. You have to take even less of it. But I think Riley Stillman has potential. And the thing is, like, this is like a younger player with some upside, and He was in Vancouver. It's not the best place to evaluate talent the way things have gone this year. So I think it makes sense to keep rolling with them because they're young enough to be good right now and take on NHL minutes, and they're young enough to be good for a very long time. So I am interested to see if this is going to be that balanced pair that it feels like Lyubushkin needs to be at his best. I know he had that, breakaway game winner recently and showed a side of his game that no one knew he had, but I know we can't rely on that consistently. We needed that he's with someone with a little more two-way pop to balance him out.
So in typical fashion, when things go off the rails, people that were at the game last night were not only hoping for a Sabres win, they were hoping for a regulation game between the Islanders and Penguins. That didn't happen. It goes beyond. It becomes a 3-point game. Ottawa wins in stunning fashion against Seattle late last night. The dynamic has shifted all of a sudden in the wild card race to a certain extent. Do you have a projected point number for what the final wild card holder will be in the East this year? What number are you staring at, which will then in turn make Sabre fans think about striving to get to that number?
I feel like it's going to be somewhere in the 90s, right? Because the Islanders are such a strange team because anytime you say they're terrible, they're horrible, I'm counting them out, they start winning again. And they're like, no, actually, look, our 5-on-5 numbers are great, which they haven't been all year, but you called us bad and now they are. I do not understand that franchise. And the Penguins are just lucky to be here still. The Penguins, for one, the Islanders have their numbers. Two, everything about the Penguins, the vibes feel terrible right now. Their deadline was a train wreck too. So are they catchable? I really wonder if they are, because I feel like if Sidney Crosby's back is against the wall, he's going to do something to drag his team forward, right? But that's a team that it feels like should not be in the position they're in. And it's kind of unfortunate. The race behind them isn't as competitive as it was, say, 3 weeks ago, because Detroit was still in the fold and Ottawa and Buffalo was closer. It feels like it's almost been decided right now. And it'll be really interesting to see if anybody can disrupt that, because the Penguins right now should not be there. They are not good enough for a playoff team, and their deadline does not deserve it either.
Okay, so let's take out Buffalo from this equation. And if Pittsburgh should not be there and somehow are the team to fall out, what's the biggest competition? Is it Florida? Is it Ottawa now? Who is the biggest competition to the Sabres to try to get to that spot?
The pesky Sens are a team to watch. They that game last night against, Seattle too, the resilience, the excitement of it. It feels like they don't do anything quietly this year. And every time the deck is stacked against them, here's an injury to both of your goaltenders. Here's injuries to one of your top 6 centers. They keep finding ways. And I think the addition of Jacob Chikrin was so big. And it seems like not just the play is improving, but the vibes are right. The management said, we're instilling some confidence in you. We believe in you. And here's a player that's going to make you guys better. And everyone also wants to do for Claude Giroux. And I have to appreciate that. So I'm going to say them, because for Florida, it just feels like this is a team that's just going to miss out, and maybe I'm going to be completely wrong on this, because they have one of the best cores out of anybody in this league. You look at, the contender checklist, the 10 elements, they check them off with flying colors this year, even when you compare some of the players falling short to their expectations. But it feels like Aaron Ekblad's not where he should be. They couldn't do anything at the deadline. And then you still have that goaltending that I think we might actually see the Senators kind of steal some of their fire.
Yeah, and Ottawa continues on this road trip after getting a win last night in Seattle. They're in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton before returning home to face Colorado and Toronto. So there are a lot of interest when you look at remaining schedules for all. The bad news for the Islanders is they're done with Pittsburgh after sweeping them for the first time in franchise history. They swept
2 comebacks, right, of it?
Unbelievable.
2 out of 4 were comebacks on top of it. That's ridiculous.
And file this one away for the most ridiculous trivia note I heard last night. The Pittsburgh Penguins all-time penalty minute leader now is...
I know. Shayna, do you know?
No.
He took a penalty last night. He took a minor penalty. He has 1,050 minutes of penalty in 1,045 games or something.
He can't be like Malkin or someone.
Yes,
right?
it
is.
Has,
ding, ding, ding. It
can't be. I was like, it cannot be Crosby. There's no way. But Malkin, when he gets frustrated, he gets spicy.
Isn't that amazing? Like
Yes.
30 years down the road, you're going to be talking about player 101 in NHL history. And oh, by the way, he's the Penguins' all-time leader in penalty minutes. Absolutely absurd. I have a fun question for you. Do you believe that Roger Federer and Martina Hingis should be co-owners of the New Jersey Devils, the first team ever to ice 4 Swiss-born players in the same game?
Yes, absolutely. Bring Roger Federer to hockey. That'd be incredible. I will be at every game. I will sneak my way into that press box just to try to become his bestie and ask him a million questions in the world. And then if he's owning a team, Roman Yossi's going to it. So give me the maximum chaos. Yeah, he loves Roger Federer. There's no way he's staying away from that.
And Mark Streit is going to be the GM, because when I played with the Islanders and Mark Streit was on our team, I remember we were in Saskatoon and we're watching the US Open, and literally Mark Streit is swinging with Roger every shot. Like
my God.
And he knew him too. Like they knew each other and he was his biggest fan. So I'm saying, if you're going to build this Swiss team in New Jersey, then you got to bring Mark Streit in some way.
The Swiss Army. They need a catchy name. They'd be like the Swiss Army.
Amazing.
Yes.
So amazing. And obviously last night, Schmid was the determining factor to get them to the point of having 4 in their lineup. And he secured the victory last night. Hischier, Siegenthaler, and Timo Meier, for those not up on New Jersey Devil birth certificates. Marty, last one goes to you.
Okay. Who do you start in net for the Sabres Saturday? Just because I think I believe it's going to be Luukkonen. He was in his own net at practice today. We know Craig Anderson's got the better numbers of everybody, but I mean, Duffer asked me daily the question, who's going to start in net? I'm going to start asking you, who do you start in net Saturday if you are Don Granato and the Sabres?
I'm throwing you in net. It's your turn.
Me? No
We're going
chance.
rotation.
I said to a fan yesterday, I'm having a hard time getting up in the chair at the end of the night. Imagine if I had to get off the ice. That wouldn't happen.
Okay, I'll come to Buffalo. We'll push you out there. We'll get, roller skates for the rest of the arena ride until you get to the ice. I am starting. It's probably going to be Luukkonen, you're right. Yeah. For the vibes and for what I think he's done against the Rangers, I'm going Craig Anderson.
Okay.
If you want to talk about an opposing goalie, as someone who grew up a Ranger fan and watched those Rangers Senators series purely as a fan, it was Craig Anderson. He was the one goaltender that worried me every time in the postseason, that I feel like there's a little something there that maybe could give him the push, the motivation. Is playing the Rangers. It's something he's been so good at in his career, and he has some good numbers this year still. I'm going with him. And I also feel like he gives me the vibes of someone who can rally the team. Mm-hmm. Like, we are not letting that happen to us again. And here's the Rangers, a bad 5-on-5 team that apparently has forgotten how to play defense and has no structure lately. They finally have a full lineup, and it's going to take some time. I would go with Craig Anderson.
Shayna, awesome insight as always. We got to fly. Have a great weekend. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks for having me.